Hi, I'm Scott at ediblemusic.com. As you become more familiar with your workstation, you'll have noticed pretty quickly that there are a lot of meters that are measuring and displaying level of various tracks and processing that you're applying. And you might be thinking, well, meters, that's not very musical. I would rather focus on being creative. But because you're making music on a computer, using equipment, using devices, they maintain some rules that we have to abide by when we're putting sound into them and getting music to come out as cleanly as possible. There are different meters of varying importance at the different stages of making music. So I'm going to show you how to make use of them in a practical way from the recording stage to the mixing stage to the mastering stage. At the recording stage, the first meter that you'll want to focus on actually is on your interface. It's not in your workstation. Whether you're recording with an instrument plugged straight into the interface or with a microphone, then you'll want to make sure that the interface doesn't light up that red lamp or ring around the gain knob so that you're recording at a nice clean level that won't distort as it's going in, because if it's distorted, if it's lighting up that red lamp on the interface, then the sound will already have some distortion going into it, and it will be really difficult to clean that up. So it's a lot better to just have a check as you're recording when you're getting started to make sure that the level is okay. The way that you might want to do this is by running through a few bars of the most dynamic part of the song, the loudest you'll be performing. And so long as it doesn't hit that red lamp, then you'll be okay. The other meter that you might want to look at while you're recording is on the track faders. And usually if your level coming in is okay on the interface, then it will be okay there. But it's worth just making sure by checking both of those things. You can do it real quick, and then as soon as you know that it's okay, then you're good to go. When you get to the mixing stage, those track fader meters become a lot more important. They measure what's called decibels full scale, and as you can see, the topmost number is 0 and everything below it is minus. So when you're talking about decibels full scale, everything will be in relation to that number 0. That's why we would say something is at the level of minus 12 or minus 10 dBs. That is because it's minus 12 in relation to that 0 marker on the decibel full scale meter. You'll also notice while the track is playing and the meter is moving, it'll have these little hats at the top of the meter, and these measure the peak. These peaks happen very quickly, and our ears tend instead to focus on average levels. So those peaks will often happen faster than our ears are able to capture them. So these little hats will stay in place just for a couple of seconds, which helps us to better identify where those peaks are occurring. But a peak meter can only tell you so much. Think about a song that might have one moment that is extra loud while the rest of the song is much quieter. The peak level of that song will be measured at that certain top level. However, it doesn't give us an accurate picture of what the rest of the song sounds like, of how loud the rest of the song is. So instead, something like a VU meter might be useful. The volume units that a VU meter measures respond to a sound much more like our ears do by listening a little bit more to the average level. So a VU meter will respond slower than a peak meter will, but it will give us a better sense of the more overall level that is happening. Unlike the maximum of 0 dB full scale, 0 VU is actually a target that you want to aim for when you're using one. VU meters were designed first when recording with a lot of electronic equipment, desks, analog stuff. So there would be these low level kind of electrical hums and buzzes. And if you were to be recording a sound too quiet, that's too near to what's called the noise floor, then if you were to bring things up as you're mixing, then all of that noise is going to come up with it. So a VU meter tends to be calibrated to about minus 18 so that it avoids the noise that would happen and would be able to come through as clean as possible without risking going over 0 dB FS as well. So it kind of aims for somewhere right in the middle. However, VU meters aren't precise because they measure average. So if there is that one very loud peak that happens, it might not even really read on the VU meter very well. So it's useful to have both of them because one makes up for the other. You'll be able to make sure that you're not crossing that 0 dBFS threshold by taking a look at the meters there. And you'll also have a better sense of the overall level that's happening by using a VU meter. As you're mixing, there are a few new meters that you'll want to account for. One of them is in your EQ. If you're using a parametric graphic equalizer, it will contain a frequency spectrum analyzer that will show you the level of all of the frequencies so that you can balance things out. Same with on a compressor, it will include a measurement of the input gain, of the gain reduction, and the output gain. All of these things are meant to help you better balance a sound, and these are, of course, a different way of measuring level, but they're an applicable way of measuring level in order to make the adjustments that you need to. But VU meters are still measuring level. They're not measuring things in accordance with how our ears work. They're closer by taking account of the average. But what's come more into use over the last couple of decades are what's called LUFS, which are Loudness Units Full Scale. These are like measuring for averages, but they take more information to account by measuring using the way that our ears work. And this is really fascinating stuff that I'm going to talk about more in the future. But one quick example is that if you're listening to a really subby bass, and at the same time you're listening to someone singing, they might be technically at the same level, but our ears would hear them at varying loudness levels. We would be much more attentive to the vocalist than to the bass frequencies. And that kind of changes as across the frequency spectrum. It's really interesting stuff, and LUFS is most useful when you get to the mastering stage. So far you've got the recording stage where you want to make sure that you're paying attention to the interface. The mixing stage will contain more meters that you want to pay attention to, both in your processing and on the tracks and on the master fader, just to make sure that nothing is going over 0 dBFS and that you're measuring your processing properly. When you get to the mastering stage, you'll be using meters a little bit differently again. Using an LUFS meter is useful because that's how streaming services will normalize the volume of tracks. So it's useful when you're mastering to aim for about -10 LUFS. Also, while you're mastering, you'll be carrying through the use of a frequency analyzer that you had probably been using while you're mixing. And that helps you to get a sense of the balance of the frequency spectrum and adjust levels there as needed. You might also make use of a correlation meter, and this helps you to keep track of whether the stereo image is okay, so it will measure whether or not the left speaker and the right speaker are aligned. In addition to LUFS, you'll want to pay attention to the decibels true peak while you're mastering. The true peak is the topmost level of the song. And the reason why you want to pay attention to this is because when the song is encoded, it might be sampled down. And when that happens, it might actually raise the level of the song. And so it might potentially risk crossing that sacred 0 dBFS threshold. So if your true peak is at -1, and try not to go over -1, then you'll probably be okay. So for mastering, shoot using an LUFS scale for about -10, a dBTP scale, the decibel true peak, at about -1. Then when you're mixing, you'll be paying attention to the decibel full scale meter on your faders, on the master channel, and you'll also want to be paying attention to the meters that are within the processing that you're making use of. All of that has the through line of that initial dBFS measurement that you want to make sure of while you're recording so that the song can come through nice and cleanly through all of these stages until it gets to the last stage, which is where you release it for us all to hear.